Hey guys, here's a quick hit on a hearing for the person who may become the next top diplomat of the United States. I'm Jenna, and this is Smarter News. Senator Marco Rubio testified in front of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee today, a committee he once served on. In fact, before the Q&A began, Senator Rubio said this about his new seat facing the panel.
Let me just say it's a bit surreal to be on this side of the room, but you all look very distinguished. And I just wanted you to know that.
Yeah. We know.
A lighter moment from what was a hearing that greatly contrasted to others, and we're going to discuss why in just a moment. You know, the news today really reminds us about the importance of this position. We have news of a potential new ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas. You have reports that the White House may remove Cuba from the designated list of state sponsors of terrorism, a designation given by the State Department. And so the Secretary of State really matters. And like the Secretary of Defense, it's one of the original cabinet positions dating back to when President Washington was in his very first term. As you might know, Thomas Jefferson held that first role as our very first Secretary of State. So the importance and the status of this cabinet position really has a rich history, including for those who later became president. In fact, 6 of the early Secretaries of State went on later to become president. So this hearing reflected a few different dynamics. We have the seriousness of the role, we have a recognition of the gravity of our times, and the hearing lacked the partisanship of other hearings we've recently watched together. Put more simply, Marco Rubio had the support of both sides of the aisle and handled a lot of really big topics. So here's 3 key takeaways. Number 1, Senator Rubio delivered a very clear summary of the priorities of the mission at hand as he sees it. Take a listen.
Ultimately, under President Trump, the top priority of the United States Department of State will be the United States. The direction he has given for the conduct of our foreign policy is clear. Every dollar we spend, every program we fund, every policy we pursue must be justified by the answer to one of 3 questions. Does it make America safer? Does it make America stronger? Or does it make America more prosperous? Under President Trump, the dollars of hardworking American taxpayers will always be spent wisely, and our power will always be yielded prudently and towards what is best for America and Americans before anything and everything else.
This sounds very direct, doesn't it? Very Trump forward. But you know what's interesting? It actually matches what the State Department has on its website under the Biden administration. Let me read this to you. Our mission: to protect and promote U.S. security, prosperity, and democratic values, and shape an international environment in which all Americans can thrive. So a clear mission with prioritizing the U.S. is a key takeaway for today, but parallels what's already stated, but perhaps we don't hear a lot from the State Department on a regular basis. Takeaway number 2, even with a clear mission, how do you do it? What's the style of leadership? What's the strategy? That was the focus of the senator from Kentucky, a Republican, Rand Paul. And here's a little bit of the back and forth between Senator Paul and Senator Rubio, specifically when talking about how to engage China.
I think often the State Department loses its sight of its mission. Instead of being the Department of Diplomacy, which I think it's supposed to be, it becomes just an extension of the Department of War and muscle, and we show how strong we are through the State Department. My hope is that you will think about a different way of doing business other than just saying, let's sanction everybody and let's call people names we don't like, because I don't think it helps. I think it actually makes the situation worse. Do you see any possibility of any carrot with China to make relations better with China?
My role now as the Secretary of State is to lead the diplomatic wing of the country, and that will involve engaging them. The fact of the matter is, in a mature and prudent conversation, and I would expect that they, at the end of the day, are also mature and prudent practitioners of foreign policy, and it is in their interest, our interest, and the interest of the world for 2 great powers to be able to communicate. In fact, despite everything I have said, I have consistently throughout my career said that it is that geopolitical balance between our countries, or imbalance, developing imbalance, that is the greatest risk to global security and prosperity, because that could quickly trigger not just a trade and economic conflict, but an armed one. So the bottom line is this: yes, we are going to have to deal with China. They're too big and too important in the world, and they're going to have to deal with us. And my goal is that it is dealt with in a way that furthers our national interest. What cannot continue to happen is that China continues to assume all of the benefits of the international system and none of its obligations, all the benefits of global trade and commerce and none of its obligations.
So we got a little insight, perhaps, into how Senator Rubio may approach this relationship. We'll see. Takeaway number 3, besides China, this hearing touched on many other areas of the world. Too many to actually mention in our short period of time together. But it's the final question that I think many could miss, and I'm so glad we didn't. So let me just sort of set the stage for you on this. It's at the end of the hearing. After lawmakers ask their question, they can leave. So it's pretty empty in there. And you have the 2 ranking members, including the ranking Democrat on the committee, Democrat Jean Shaheen from New Hampshire. And she's like, I just have one more question. And what she wanted to talk about is an area of the world you've recently heard a lot about, the Arctic. And it's the mention of Greenland that I thought you might find interesting here.
The one area that you mentioned, but we haven't really talked about, is the Arctic. And given what's happening in the Arctic and China's designs on the Arctic, can you just speak to what you think our posture ought to be with respect to the Arctic?
Well, we're an Arctic power. The Russians are legitimate Arctic power. The Chinese are not. I think, frankly, I know you didn't ask me this question, but it's one I welcome the ability to talk about in some of this discussion with Greenland. I think we need to understand that Greenland has been strategically important to the United States and to the West for a very long time. Yes, the access to the minerals on Greenland are critically important. But as more navigable space is opening up in the Arctic, particularly this northern passage that goes from Russia to China, Russia to Asia, and could cut transit times by as much as 40%, the Arctic is going to become incredibly critical. And so we have to have a presence there. We have to have a presence there, not just saying, okay, we have a base, we have 200 people, or we have a flag flying. We have to have the ability, for example, to have the ships that can navigate on the naval level and keep those shipping lanes open if, in fact, they're being threatened. We have positions within the State Department that I think in the past have been diminished or people just haven't paid a lot of attention to. And I just had this conversation the other day with Senator Murkowski that all of a sudden I think people are interested in serving in Arctic affairs and in Arctic posts because this issue of Greenland has opened our eyes to the broader geographic importance of the Arctic region, which long has been a curiosity or something people have not talked about. But I think now we have the opportunity to see it for what it is. And that is, one, if not the most important, one of the most critical parts of the world over the next 50 to 100 years will be whether there's going to be freedom of navigation in the Arctic and what that will mean for global trade and commerce.
So, Greenland or bust in 2025? Let's see. Smarter Greenland? It might have a little bit of a ring to it. Big picture from this hearing, no fireworks. And I found myself wondering, well, maybe I should look at another hearing that's a little bit more dramatic. Maybe there's a couple viral moments that I'm missing. And I caught myself because that's actually the problem with news I'm trying to solve here with Smarter News. There's a lot of viral moments that are simply junk food for the mind. War and peace really matter. That impacts every single one of us. So we may not have the viral moments, but we have on the record today some insight into how this next administration will engage the world. So I hope you find this valuable, and I look forward to your thoughts. What country do you think should be prioritized by the next administration? In the meantime, I want to leave you with a little bit of a laugh. It was this really special moment between Senator Rubio, a Republican from Florida, and Senator Tammy Duckworth, a Democrat from Illinois. Senator Duckworth lost her legs during a combat operation in Iraq. She also gave birth while in office, and she had a few challenges associated with her very unique place in the world. And it's a moment that was shared between the two of them that we don't see very often in Congress. And maybe we should, because these moments are part of our American story too. So we'll leave you with that. In the meantime, thank you for your support of quick, concise, nonpartisan news.
When I first got to the Senate and I was in my first year and you just run for president and I didn't think you would know who I was pregnant with my daughter and trying to change Senate rules so that I could bring her onto the floor so I could do my job and vote because I can't come through the normal back door to vote because there's stairs there and it's not accessible for wheelchairs. And I remember in the middle of that battle, rolling through the Senate floor to vote, and I heard, "Tammy Duckworth," from across the Senate chambers, and you came running down from the top back of the Senate chambers to tell me, "I'm with you, I will support you, you have the right to vote, and I will support you being able to bring your daughter, your child onto the floor when she's born." And I want to thank you for that kindness because you did speak to your leadership about it. And it was a moment of true bipartisanship, but also as parents. And as someone who was new to the Senate, I was extremely grateful to you for that kindness.
I think what I exactly said is, what's the big deal? This place is already full of babies.
Exactly, exactly.